Let's welcome in two of our guys. We have Ryan, Wilson, and Danny Kanell here. We're going to be talking about the biggest needs for each of these teams. Ryan, we'll start with you. We're going to start with the Bears' #1 overall pick. I feel like this is probably the easiest one you had to figure out.
Yes, Amanda, we're all draft analysts today when it comes to the Bears for the first overall pick. I don't think you could mess this up. It feels certainly like quarterback. It feels like Caleb Williams is the easy selection here. There's nothing to overthink. You draft Caleb, and then you regroup and you think about what you're going to do with that #9 pick. They also have needs at edge rusher, and maybe that's consideration at 9 when the Bears are back on the clock if they don't choose to trade down. And maybe even a wide receiver if you want to get another weapon for presumably Caleb Williams when he arrives in town. He just does so many things that you look for in a franchise quarterback. No squinting is involved to see how it projects to the next level. They have a new offensive coordinator in Shane Waldron. There's a lot of reasons for the first time in a long time for our guy Chris Hassel to be excited about what the Bears could look like in 2024.
Danny, you're up next. Biggest team need for the Commanders.
Yeah, Tommy, let's not complicate this. I'll keep the same thing as Ryan Wilson. It doesn't take an expert to predict what the Commanders need right here. You look at the list of quarterbacks they lost. There is a massive void that they will fill with QB. That clearly is the most important position. I like the fact that Marcus Mariota's been around. I think he's a good, veteran kind of to watch over a young QB, but that's where they're going at #2. And I think with Cliff Kingsbury, that does have some intrigue. There's been a lot of debate, speculation. They just brought in several quarterbacks together to try to get them stack up. I think it's between two. I am not buying the J.J. McCarthy hype. I think it's between Jaden Daniels and Drake May. And maybe it's more of a fit for the offense and what Cliff Kingsbury likes and the success that he's had with a little bit more mobile quarterbacks, more dynamic quarterbacks. What he took with Kyler Murray when he was in Arizona has me leaning towards Jaden Daniels. I like Drake May slightly better, but I think there's a pretty slim margin there between the two. So I'll say they go ahead and take Jaden Daniels or Drake May, and I'll lean Jaden Daniels.
Ryan, moving down the draft here, we have the Cardinals coming in at #4. You're going with their biggest need as wide receiver. You actually have them staying in that position, and there's so many wide receivers in this draft. Is that what you think they end up doing?
I think Monty Ossenport, the GM, is in the old catbird seat. I don't know if people say that anymore, but that's something that the old people say. And I think it means you're in the position you want to be in to have the most leverage. And that's exactly where the Cardinals find themselves at #4 because they could stay put and you take Marvin Harrison Jr. And I've heard that that's who they're leaning towards if we're talking about this deep class of wide receivers that you mentioned, Amanda. Or they could even trade down if they wanted to and get even more picks. They do have 2 first-round picks. But I love the idea of getting Kyler Murray a weapon that looks like Marvin Harrison Jr. out there running around. You see there they lost Hollywood Brown, he's now in Kansas City, and Rondale Moore. And then when they get back into that first-round pick, if they don't trade down, they could target a cornerback to help that secondary or even get an edge rusher. And there are going to be some edges that go off the board late in the first round. Chop Robinson, Darius Robinson could be among those. But I think the easy choice, again, like Danny and I have talked about so far through this conversation, take Marvin Harrison Jr., pat yourself on the back, and get ready for your next pick.
So if we move down to 6, the Giants have that selection, one of Danny's former teams here, DK. What do you think about the G-Men?
So I know there's been some speculation about the Giants being in the market for a quarterback. I'm not buying it. I think they're stuck with Daniel Jones, whether they like it or not. The contract, a little bit prohibitive. And I also think the Giants are loyal to a fault in some circumstances. I think this might be one of them where Daniel Jones, and if you talk to some Giants fans and even some of their personnel, they're well aware that Daniel Jones hasn't had a great supporting cast. Half the time Saquon Barkley was hurt when he struggled. The offensive line had issues. He didn't have any real weapons. Well, that could all change, and that's why I think wide receivers they're going to target here at #6. I thought for a second about Joe Alt, the big tackle under Notre Dame, but I think it's receiver. And if we see quarterbacks go, 4 quarterbacks go ahead, you should have pretty good options. Marvin Harrison Jr., most likely, like Ryan had him, probably goes off the board ahead of them. So I think that leaves Malik Neighbors as a great option for the Giants to select. I think we haven't seen a real dynamic playmaker there in quite some time. It's been a few years, and you give Daniel Jones a weapon like this, there are no more excuses. You've got a playmaker on the outside. I tend to like Malik Neighbors better than Marvin Harrison Jr., which would be perfect if you had him fall into your lap as the second receiver off the board. But they got to get Daniel Jones some help, so I'll say they find it in this year's draft.
Ryan, what about the Falcons? We find them at the top 10 as well at #8. They found their quarterback in Kirk Cousins. What else do the Falcons need?
New head coach in Raheem Morris. He's a defensive guy, but when he was a head coach previously for the first time in Tampa Bay, their very first pick was quarterback. I don't think that's going to happen here, although I should point out that our buddy Jonathan Jones had Michael Penix Jr. going 8 to the Falcons in his mock draft that came out today, so that's exciting. I think more than likely, if we're just playing what we think is probably going to happen, they got to fix that defense along up front, and I think that starts with the edge rush position. And the beautiful thing about being at pick 8, if you don't trade down, is that you're going to be able to take either Dallas Turner, if that's your guy, or Jared Verse, if that's your guy, or even a Leatu Latu. I don't think he goes that high, but if he has a clean bill of health, I think he's in the conversation. But you see Dallas Turner here, and this is exactly what he does against SEC competition week in and week out. He is a high motor player, disruptive in the backfield. He's better against the pass than the run, but he can certainly improve in that area. And I think that if you are the Falcons, this feels like a pretty easy pick because you've lost some edge rush talent through free agency, and now you get it back, and you have your offense going with Kirk Cousins.
DK, let's get to the Vikings, who have top-heavy draft capital. I'm curious to get your thoughts what their biggest team need is and whether you think they maybe package that to get what they need.
Yeah, I think they need a quarterback. I'm not buying Sam Darnold as, even this opportunity. I've seen enough from him. I think the Vikings have too. I think they realize his role is going to be that fill-in spot to help mentor a young quarterback. They have to go find their franchise QB. And at 11, they do have the capital. A lot of people have them trading up in this draft. To me, it's just a matter of who do they go get. I think it should be Drake May if he's available and they could trade up into that spot. A lot of people have J.J. McCarthy as their favorite as well. Either way, they've got to get one of those two. I think J.J. McCarthy is a little bit overhyped at this position. If he fell to 11, I'd be good with it. But if they give up a lot to go up in that top 3 or 4 spots to get J.J. McCarthy, I think it potentially could make a rough start for him. If they did the same move with Drake May, I would like it a lot better. I think there is separation between the two as far as upside, what it could be. I know everyone loves the intangibles of J.J. McCarthy. I just haven't seen enough on film. For Drake May, I know he had a rough season, but he did not have the talent around him that some of these other quarterbacks did. I think the sky's the limit. So I would go with Drake May here of the Vikings, and I would do whatever it takes to get him if they've got that capital you mentioned, Tommy.
See how much they have to give up to trade up to try to get Drake May. Ryan, try to fix the New Orleans Saints for us. They were close to the postseason this past year, didn't make it. They have now still missed it every single year since Drew Brees retired. Where do they go here?
Right, and quarterbacks should be in the conversation, but Derek Carr's contract is prohibitive, and I think the first order of business, if you're sticking with Derek Carr, is to fix the offensive line. Trevor Penning, the first-round pick they traded up for a few years ago, hasn't worked out. Ryan Ramczyk, the right tackle, may not be able to play because of a knee injury, so they're waiting to find out his fate, and I think if that's the case, and you're sitting here at 14, and there's an opportunity for someone like Olafashinu, you see there, sitting there. He is my offensive tackle 1 because of the athleticism and the upside 2, 3, 4 years from now. I think Joe Alt's a better player in year 1 at left tackle, and that's probably why he goes to the Titans at 7. But if you have Olafashinu sitting here at 14, you run and take him. You could take a Tuli Fuaga, at Oregon State as well, who can play right tackle day 1 if Ramczyk doesn't work out. So there'll be some options at 14, and maybe even consider trading down if you think there's some players later in the first round at the tackle position you could target.
Danny, you got the Seattle Seahawks up next. Much like the Saints, close but not close enough here. Where do you think they go?
So this one's interesting, Tommy, because Mike McDonald takes over. And I went back. I was trying to determine what Harbaugh tree he's from because he's coached under both, with John Harbaugh of Baltimore and Jim Harbaugh in Michigan. So he's probably had a little bit of both of their philosophies. And when I think of what they want to do, they want to build from the inside out. And they need help on both sides of the offensive and defensive line. If they want to go offensive line, I'd go with Troy Fautanu out of Washington, one of the members of that offensive line, which won the Joe Moore Award at the tackle. He's played guard as well. I think that's always that versatility is an asset that you can have on your side. So that's where I would hope they go if they went offensive. But if they went defensive, those big D tackles aren't on every street corner. They're hard to find, and Texas has not 1 but 2 of them. I do think Byron Murphy is the better of the 2. And I think he'd be the guy that I would circle if I was the Seahawks looking to really bolster up the interior of that defensive line. He's got freakishly talented gifts. He can run, he can move. He's got cat-like quickness who can really disrupt quarterbacks. So I'd say they're going one of those offensive or defensive line positions.
Seahawks with the 16th overall pick. We're going to jump to, 19, in the Rams. Ryan, you mentioned in your article, of course, Aaron Donald retiring. You said it would take 4 or 5 players to try to replace him. But is that their biggest need when it comes to the draft?
And the Rams will be watching Danny and the Seahawks very closely at 16, because if they take Byron Murphy the second, that's a problem for the Rams trying to replace Aaron Donald, because Byron Murphy's special. But if he is there at 19, that's who you take. And perhaps a little fun fact that's even more interesting in the overall picture is that this is Sean McVay's first-round pick since arriving in L.A. in 2017. Prior to that, it was Jared Goff the year before. So, all right, we're going to do the opposite of forget them picks, and we're actually going to draft some guys. So Byron Murphy's gone. Johnny Newton could be a possibility out of Illinois. He's another twitch-up interior defensive lineman. They need help in the secondary, the nickelback position. You saw they lost Jordan Fuller there, but that's perhaps something you circle back in round 2 and get. And sort of like the Seahawks, maybe you think about offensive line if the defensive lineman you don't want is there, because Sean McVay, after all, is all about the offense, and he might want to bolster that unit given that Matthew Stafford's coming back.
So we're taking a look at the Rams' notable offseason moves. We continue to talk about teams now in the conversation of playoff teams. The Philadelphia Eagles, DK, what do they need to address to get back to the Super Bowl?
Tommy, the other thing, too, once you get further down here, you have to start really being open to adjust your draft philosophy. I mean, Ryan was just talking about, if this player is taken off the board. So that's kind of where I went with the Eagles. They desperately need help in the secondary. They got absolutely torched last season. And I think Nate Wiggins out of Clemson at 6'1", longer guy with a pretty good, coverage skills there, could be the option they go. If they try to bolster up that secondary, which is getting older as well, that could be one of their future guys, a lockdown corner on the outside. As you look at them, it just absolutely atrocious in the pass defense. They need to address that. If they can't get Wiggins, there's also, so I think this is a little bit high, but clearly I think one of their needs is along the offensive line, the interior of that offensive line. With Jason Kelce retiring, you've got guys getting a little bit older in Lane Johnson. They've got to address this issue, which I do think they do. And while this might be a little bit lofty for the first round, maybe it's let him fall to the second round. Zach Zinter, Michigan's offensive lineman, who we did see get hurt last year. He missed their postseason run. He is uber talented, and as long as he's healthy, which I think he would be, I think that's the reason he may be available a little bit later. I think they should snatch him up to secure that interior of the offensive line for Jalen Hurts.
Staying in the NFC East, you find the Cowboys at 24. Ryan, they may be horrible in the offseason, but they normally draft pretty well. What are some of the Cowboys' needs?
Yeah, I'm still waiting, Amanda, for Jerry Jones to keep his promise about how things are going to be fireworks for the offseason for the Cowboys. So far, not so much, and maybe things change next week, and they desperately need to fix that offensive line. Tyron Smith is gone. Does Tyler Smith now move from left guard to left tackle? We heard Danny mention earlier Troy Fautanu. If Troy Fautanu is here, he is your dude. There are plenty of options here. Again, Tully Fuaga can play right tackle. Maybe you go with interior offensive line if the plan is to move Tyler Smith to left tackle, and you could get a Jackson Powers Johnson who can play guard center. You can get a Graham Barton. There are going to be some options here. Something to consider in later rounds is perhaps a linebacker to replace Leighton Vander Esch, and they're going to have to get a running back at some point. And maybe in round 2 or round 3 they get Danny's guy Trey Benson out of Florida State, who had a fantastic season in 2023 for the Seminoles.
Danny, you're up next with the team that beat the Cowboys in the playoffs, the Packers.
Yeah, they've already drafted a lot to the wide receiver. They got some young talent there to put around Jordan Love. So I have them attacking the defensive side of the ball here with a couple options. Cooper DeJean out of Iowa, really strong physical player on the defensive side of the ball in the secondary. Very versatile, is coming off an injury, but we also saw what he could do in the return game as well. He's pretty dynamic there if they want somebody with a more versatility. And then Kool-Aid McKinstry out of Alabama. I feel like he was projected to go a little bit higher than where we might see him go now, but I still think he's a really talented player. Coming out of Bama, he'll be able to be coachable, and he's got that pedigree. But I think ultimately the Packers have to go after some secondary help here.
Moving toward the bottom of the first round, let's go with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Ryan, you have them taking an offensive tackle in your latest mock draft, but you don't have that as their biggest need. What is it?
I think their biggest need is probably cornerback. They've done a really good job in free agency of bringing back the guys they want. That includes Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans, of course. I think in the secondary, they lost a few players and have a chance to get stronger there. They do have Antoine Winfield Jr. coming back, and that's incredibly important. And then interior offensive line does make some sense as well. Ryan Jensen retired, so they have to figure out how they're going to work that out. But I like the idea of bolstering the secondary, and Danny's talked about it here, that you're going to have to start adjusting your draft boards as these players get taken ahead of you. Maybe you consider trading out of the round altogether. But if you're sitting there and there's a cornerback you like or an interior offensive lineman you like, I think that's where you start the conversation if you're Tampa Bay.
Got a few more left then. DK, the Lions up next.
Oh, man, when you think of Dan Campbell, what do you think of? Physical run game. They already addressed the running back position last year. Feel like they're good with quarterback and Jared Goff, wide receiver. But along the offensive line, that's where I think really you start speaking to Dan Campbell and say they want to get some young talent along there. I went with the Oregon center, who's also pretty versatile up front, Jackson Powers-Johnson. I think he's uber talented. Or Zach Frazier out of West Virginia. I just feel like the offensive line is a position of need for them where they could really bolster it up, kind of set themselves up for yet another playoff push and continue to build that physical mindset that Dan Campbell wants to bring to Detroit.
When it comes, Danny, when I think of Dan Campbell, I just think of kneecaps. I forget if it was biting kneecaps or like taking out kneecaps, whatever it was, but that's what I think about. Love Dan Campbell here. Let's go to the 49ers, Ryan. A lot of chatter about Brandon Ayuk, what's going to happen to him, so we're going to have to wait and see there. But right now, what is their biggest need?
Again, I'm going to go to the secondary, and we've been talking a lot about secondary players here, so there may be slim pickings at this point, and maybe you do target a wide receiver if that's your plan in a post-Brandon Ayuk world. But you have to understand that while they have Travaris Ward, who played at a high level, Talanoa Hufanga coming back from the ACL, he's important to what they do. Ambry Thomas is in the final year of his deal, and a player that I love here for the 49ers is Ennis Rakestraw Jr. out of Missouri. The will with which he plays football, and by that I mean running through people as a quote-unquote undersized cornerback off the edge, reminds me a lot of Devin Witherspoon. He didn't test as well. He ran 4.5. He didn't run 4.3, but he plays with that sort of edge. He can cover down the field, and he's an asset in the run game, and he feels like a 49er to me, and that's perhaps a place you start the conversation. All those guys are gone. Maybe you think about trading down, or maybe getting an offensive lineman you like to help bolster that unit.
Last but not least, Danny gets the Carolina Panthers, which do not have their first round pick. That goes to the Bears with the Bryce Young trade. So their first pick, Danny, second round early, but in terms of their biggest need, what are you looking at?
Tommy, I don't know if we have time. We should do a whole show on the needs that they need to give Bryce Young the support he has on the offensive side of the football. The good news is they do have two number twos, so they can get a couple talented guys. Wide receiver and running back were two of the most important positions, I think, to give a young quarterback. If you get the run game to give him some support, then all of a sudden it makes things a lot easier in the pass game. I think they should prioritize wide receiver. I don't know if he'll be available in the second, but my guy Keon Coleman from Florida State, I love his skill set. He's big, he's physical, he's got a great catch radius, strong hands, catches everything in his sight. Again, I don't know if he's available here. I'll be bummed if he is, and I think it could be the steal of the draft if they do get him there. And then the guy that maybe not as physically impressive, but the production was there, was Ladd McConkey, the receiver out of Georgia. Every time you watch the Georgia Bulldogs play, he was making critical catches for them. So I think McConkey could be an option as well. And then running back, Jonathan Brooks. Ryan Wilson mentioned my guy Trey Benson from Florida State as well, but Jonathan Brooks coming off an injury. I know he tore that ACL, but you could be some value here in the second or maybe, early third for a Jonathan Brooks out of Texas, who's as dynamic as it comes. If he makes the full recovery, I think he could be a huge addition to the Carolina Panthers as well. Any way you look at it, they have got to get Bryce Young some help around him, or else we're going to be talking potential bust, which I think is unfair. And a lot of times we talk about the situations guys are in. This is one where it was about as bad as it gets for Bryce Young. They've got to get him some help.
Let's try not to give Pete Prisco any more ammo that he already has in regards to Bryce Young and the Carolina Panthers. Danny, Ryan, certainly appreciate it. Ryan, part of the With the First Pick podcast with Rick Spielman. Busy time of the year for these guys, taping multiple times a week. Check them out today, and if you haven't already, scan that QR code.